Maya stepped into the cold, marble hallway, her breath visible in the chill air. She had finished cleaning the billionaire's mansion, another day of being invisible. But tonight, something was different. Thomas Beckett stood in the doorway, his silhouette dark against the dim hallway light. "Stay," he said, his voice low, almost a command. She froze, heart pounding. "Stay?" Her mind raced. This wasn't part of the deal. But his eyes held something she couldn't read. The risk was clear. One wrong move and she'd be gone, just like the others. But in that moment, Maya made a choice. She didn't know it yet, but staying would change everything. Thomas stepped closer, and for the first time, she realized he wasn't the man she thought he was. Maya stood still, her eyes fixed on the floor, feeling the weight of his gaze press against her skin. She wasn't used to being noticed, not by someone like him. She had spent years in the background, cleaning up messes that didn't belong to her, scrubbing the dirt of others' lives off her hands. But now, as the silence stretched between them, she felt her pulse quicken. The moment was too heavy, too filled with the unspoken. Thomas Beckett had never spoken to her this way before, and yet here he was, his voice low, inviting her into something she wasn't sure she wanted. She couldn't afford to back away. Not now. Not when the world had already written her off. She could feel the chill of the marble floor beneath her feet, her worn-out shoes barely making a sound as she shifted her weight. The air smelled faintly of lemon and bleach, a reminder of the hours spent scrubbing, of the tired ache that had become her constant companion. Her hands, rough and cracked, still held the faintest traces of yesterday's dust that had no place in the world of people like Thomas. Yet it had never mattered to her. The dirt on her hands was something she could wash away, but the dignity she held inside could not be scrubbed clean. That was something she had to protect, even if it meant swallowing her pride, even if it meant accepting a job that left her invisible. Her life had been a long string of survival. She had learned long ago that showing up, staying in the game, was enough to keep moving forward. Not for the promise of wealth or luxury. No, she stayed for the smaller things. The way the sun felt through the window when she cleaned the kitchen at dawn. The satisfaction of seeing things in their place. The way a warm meal at the end of the day could make her forget about everything she didn't have. But Thomas had never seen any of that. He didn't know about the nights she lay awake, the hunger in her stomach too loud to ignore, the empty cupboards that hadn't been filled in months. He didn't know about the times she wanted to cry, but couldn't, because crying wouldn't feed her mother's medical bills. Crying wouldn't fix the leaky faucet or pay the rent. No, crying was for the weak, and she wasn't weak. She wasn't that. Not for the world to see. But standing there now, the loneliness of her existence was heavier than she cared to admit. Thomas was right there, watching her, seeing her. Not just as the maid, but as something more. And for the first time, someone noticed her. Really noticed her. She could feel it in the way his eyes lingered a second too long, like he was searching for something in her that she wasn't sure was there. The tension between them thickened. She wasn't sure why she hadn't just walked away yet. Maybe it was because for once, she wanted to believe that something better could come from this moment. That maybe, just maybe, this time it wouldn't be her who was invisible. The mansion loomed ahead, its towering columns reaching for the sky, a monument to everything Maya could never have. The marble floors gleamed under soft chandeliers, the silence in the halls as heavy as the weight of money that seeped into the very air. It was a world that had no place for someone like her. The maids glided past her in their crisp uniforms, invisible even to each other, servants in a world of polished gold. Thomas Beckett, standing in his tailored suit, was the embodiment of that world. He belonged here, he always had. And Maya? She was just another shadow moving through the periphery, unnoticed. The power in the room wasn't just in the wealth, it was in the way people spoke, the way they walked. Everything was precise, controlled, calculated. Conversations between the executives were nothing more than exchanges of profit margins. Their laughter cold and empty. Maya had never been invited to join those conversations. She wasn't even seen. But now, standing in the midst of this opulence, she was keenly aware of how far she had fallen, how far she could never reach. The long marble hallways seemed to echo her thoughts, each step in her worn shoes a reminder of her place. As she passed the glass windows that framed the city's skyline, the world outside felt just as distant, just as unreachable. Thomas was always at the center of everything, powerful, revered, feared. He ran a company that stretched its influence through every corner of the city, its wealth like a tide that could drown anyone beneath it. He didn't need to say a word to command respect. His presence alone did that. But for Maya, the only thing she commanded was the mop and the bucket she carried with her, cleaning the messes of the people who would never notice her. The dining room was the heart of this fortress. Polished silverware glistened under the harsh overhead lights, the laughter of guests ringing off the high ceilings. Thomas sat at the head of the table, his smile more like a mask than anything genuine. He gestured with his glass, discussing investments, deals, and the endless cycle of wealth. None of it concerned her. She wasn't a part of this world. Maya watched as they ate, their plates laden with foods she had never tasted, exotic fruits, rich meats, and delicate pastries that seemed to mock the emptiness in her own stomach. She wasn't invited to join them. She wasn't supposed to be seen, only to serve. The cold air from the vents above made her shiver, the hum of the refrigerator a reminder of how easily the rich could forget. They had everything, and they had no interest in the people who made it possible. Maya's fingers, raw from years of scrubbing, felt the weight of this disparity each time she picked up a glass or moved a plate. She was an invisible piece in their perfect machine, one they couldn't have cared less about. She didn't belong here, not in their world of wealth and power. She was just a face in the background. But somewhere, deep inside, she couldn't help but wonder, what if, just once, she wasn't invisible? What if Thomas Beckett finally saw her? Maya was at the back of the room, her hands clasped tightly around the dusting cloth, her eyes lingering on the polished surface of the grand piano. The party was in full swing, laughter and voices blending into a background hum. Yet she was trapped in a bubble of silence. She wasn't supposed to be seen. She wasn't even supposed to be here. But tonight, something was different. Thomas Beckett stood at the center of the room, talking to a group of executives, his words cutting through the air, his charm effortless, his power undeniable. She watched as he gestured toward the main table, discussing figures, contracts, things that didn't matter to her. She was just a maid, invisible and small, a ghost passing between the grandiose columns of the mansion. But as she passed near the front, she overheard something she couldn't ignore. The conversation was about a deal, a major merger that had gone wrong. The liability clause was a trap, a legal trick that would cost Thomas Company millions if they signed. She knew the language of contracts. She knew what it meant. Thomas didn't. He hadn't read the fine print. It was clear. He didn't understand the risk. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of her own hesitation. She had always kept her mouth shut, always stayed in the background. But now she couldn't just walk away. This wasn't about class or status or money. This was about something far deeper. It was about honesty, about truth. She couldn't stand by while Thomas made a mistake that could ruin him, ruin everything. She had to do something. She couldn't just be the invisible servant in the background anymore. Maya took a deep breath and stepped forward, crossing the line she had never dared to cross before. She walked straight up to the group, her shoes clicking on the marble floor, the sound of them echoing too loudly in her own ears. The chatter died down for a moment as they turned to her, and she could feel their eyes on her, those cold, judgmental eyes. She felt her hands sweat as she approached Thomas. She had never spoken to him like this, never addressed him as an equal. But tonight, she wasn't going to stay silent. She was done being invisible. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice trembled, but she pushed forward, refusing to back down. "The clause in the contract you're about to sign, it's not what you think. It's a trap." The silence that followed was thick. Thomas blinked, his brow furrowing as the room shifted uncomfortably. "What do you mean, Maya?" he asked, the edge of condescension still present in his voice. But there was something in his eyes now, something that hadn't been there before. He was listening. "I've seen this before," she said, her voice steadier now. "The liability clause, you're going to be responsible for everything if this deal falls through. All the lawsuits, all the damages, they'll be yours. Vaughn's firm walks away clean. This could cost you everything." The room grew tense as Thomas studied her, his face unreadable. The executives behind him exchanged nervous glances, clearly uncomfortable with a maid speaking up so boldly. Maya could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the tension between them thickening by the second. She knew the risk. She knew what could happen if she was wrong. She could lose her job, be thrown out on the street. No one would believe her. She was just the help. But she couldn't stay silent. "Maya, this is none of your business." One of the executives, a man in a sharp suit, snapped. "You should stay out of it." But Maya stood her ground. "It is my business," she said, her voice firm, her eyes locking with Thomas. "It's everyone's business when you're about to sign away your company's future." The tension in the room was suffocating now, the weight of her words hanging over them like a storm. Thomas' face softened for a moment, but then his eyes hardened. "Get out," he said, his voice cold. "Now." Maya flinched, but she didn't move. She had said what she had to say. The risk of speaking up was heavy, but it was worth it. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, and Maya slowly turned to leave, but just before she reached the door, Thomas spoke again, his voice much quieter now. "Wait." She turned, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't disdain. He was considering her words, considering her. "Stay," he said, this time without the usual command, without the usual arrogance. Maya froze. The room watched in silence. What was he going to do? What would happen next? Maya stood frozen as Thomas Beckett's words hung in the air like a threat. "Get out," he had said. His voice was cold, but there was something else beneath it. Something she didn't want to acknowledge. She hadn't expected it to be like this. The weight of the room's stare was unbearable as she slowly turned to leave, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel their eyes on her, 1,000 silent judgments piercing through her. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be a part of their world. Her place was in the background, invisible, a mere shadow. But this was different. And as she reached for the door, something inside her snapped. She stopped. The cold air from the hallway felt like ice against her skin. She was shaking, but it wasn't from the temperature. It was from the fear, the humiliation. She hadn't meant for it to go like this. She didn't know what had made her speak out, what had made her think she could challenge someone like Thomas Beckett. She wasn't supposed to be here, wasn't supposed to have an opinion. She was just the maid, the help. "You don't belong here," one of the executives muttered under his breath. The words stung, sharp as glass. She didn't turn to look at him. She didn't need to. She could feel his gaze, the weight of it pressing against her back, cutting through her like a knife. He didn't see her. None of them did. She was nothing. A whisper in the background, meant to clean and leave, meant to stay silent and disappear. But now she had dared to step out of line. Maya, Thomas' voice was suddenly close behind her, cutting through the tension like a blade. She turned slowly, the room spinning slightly in her vision. He was standing there, his expression unreadable, but the power in his eyes was unmistakable. He was angry. He was angry at her. "You've embarrassed me," he said, his words heavy, full of venom. Maya flinched, her stomach dropping. Her heart raced in her chest, each beat a drum in her ears. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. Her throat felt tight, her breath shallow. She was choking on the weight of his gaze. I didn't mean to." "No," he cut her off, his voice rising. "You didn't mean to, but you did. You spoke out of turn, Maya. You've crossed a line." She could feel the heat rising in her chest, the sting of his words searing through her. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, but she couldn't. She couldn't move. "You've embarrassed me in front of my team, in front of my colleagues, in front of people who matter." The words struck her like a punch, each one hitting harder than the last. She was nothing. She had always been nothing. And now she was even less than that. The humiliation was suffocating, a weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The silence in the room felt like a living thing, heavy and thick. She could feel the eyes of the executives on her, their judgment clear, their whispers sharp. She wanted to run. She wanted to hide. But she couldn't. Thomas took a step forward, his presence overwhelming, his voice now low, but just as biting. I've tolerated you because you're useful. You clean. You do what's asked of you, no questions. But this, he shook his head, his jaw clenched. This is unacceptable. She could feel the heat rise in her face, the sting of his words cutting deeper with each passing second. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words felt wrong, twisted. What could she say? What was there to say? She wasn't meant to be here. She wasn't meant to matter. I've given you a job, Thomas continued, his voice colder now, as if he were talking to a child. I've paid you. I've been generous. And this is how you repay me. His words were like ice, each one a crack in her already fragile sense of self. She wanted to fight back, to tell him she hadn't asked for any of this, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she? How could she argue with him when she was nothing more than a servant in his eyes? Maya felt small. She felt invisible again, just like she had always been. But this time it was different. This time she had spoken up. And now everything was falling apart. The room around her felt like it was closing in. The walls were too close, the floor too hard beneath her feet. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, all of them silently judging, silently condemning her. She was an outsider. She was nothing. She had dared to speak, dared to challenge him, and now she was paying the price. Thomas stepped back, his expression hardening, his voice losing the edge of anger but gaining something worse. Disappointment. You're nothing but a maid, Maya, he said, the words cutting through her like a blade. You should know your place. His eyes held hers for a moment, cold and unforgiving, before he turned away. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She was shaking now, the tears burning in her eyes, but she couldn't let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Not in front of him. Maya turned toward the door again, her heart hammering in her chest. She was nothing. She always had been. She was a ghost in their world, invisible and small. But as she reached for the handle, she felt a hand on her arm. She froze. The touch was gentle, almost kind, but it didn't make her feel better. It only made the shame more real. She turned, her eyes wide with surprise. Thomas was standing there, his expression softer now, though the hardness in his eyes hadn't disappeared. I'm sorry, he said, his voice quiet, but it didn't matter. The words didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. Maya stepped outside, her hand gripping the cold, wrought iron handle of the door. The air was thick with the scent of rain, the sky a muted gray, as if the clouds themselves were mourning. The chill of the evening wrapped around her, sinking into her skin. She took a deep breath, the cool air filling her lungs, but it did little to ease the tightness in her chest. Her body felt heavy, the weight of the night pressing down on her like an invisible force. The marble floors of the mansion, the gleaming walls, the whispered judgments, they all seemed so far away now. She was standing on the edge of the grand estate, the soft patter of rain against the ground the only sound in the stillness. The world seemed quieter here, as if nature itself had decided to give her a moment to breathe. But even in this moment, there was no peace. Maya could still feel the weight of Thomas Beckett's words, the sting of his gaze. The coldness in his voice still echoed in her mind, even as the wind tugged at her hair. She looked down at her hands, calloused, worn, still trembling slightly from the confrontation. The rain fell gently around her, soft droplets that seemed to cleanse the air, but it didn't cleanse her. The tears that had burned in her eyes earlier still lingered, waiting for a moment to break free. She turned her face upward, letting the rain fall on her skin, feeling the coldness seep through her clothes. the dampness a sharp contrast to the warmth of the mansion she had just left behind. Maya had spent years cleaning, scrubbing away the dirt, both from the floors and from her own soul. But tonight, the dirt wasn't the problem. It was the feeling of being invisible. She had always been invisible. To Thomas, to the world around her, she was nothing more than the help, the maid. A shadow moving through the halls, never meant to be seen, never meant to be heard. But tonight she had spoken up. She had crossed a line. And now the world seemed colder for it. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the rain wash over her, feeling the cool droplets against her face. She was tired. Tired of being invisible, tired of fighting for recognition, tired of pretending that she didn't care. But at the same time, she was afraid. Afraid that if she let go, if she gave in to the tears that threatened to fall, she would lose the little dignity she had left. The light from the mansion flickered in the distance, casting long shadows across the yard. Maya stayed in the rain, feeling the droplets soak through her clothes, her heart still racing from the encounter. It wasn't just the humiliation. It was the realization that she would never belong in a world like that. She would never be invited to sit at their tables, never be treated as an equal. She was just the help. She had always been just the help. But the night had changed her. Thomas had made her feel small, insignificant, but in some strange way, he had also made her feel something else, alive. She had spoken up. She had fought for something she believed in, even if it was just a small thing, even if it had cost her. Maya opened her eyes, the rain now falling harder, the world around her blurring into a haze of gray and silver. She could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her, the weight of the world, the weight of her choices. The mansion was still there, towering above her, but it felt distant now. Felt like a world she didn't belong in. Maybe she never had. But still, there was a part of her that wondered if things could be different. She turned away from the mansion, the soft thud of her footsteps the only sound in the silence. She walked toward the edge of the property, her thoughts swirling like the rain around her. Her breath was steady now, but the cold had sunk into her bones. She was alone, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely invisible. The rain fell harder now, each drop a reminder that she was still here. She had spoken. She had fought. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Maya walked away, her shoes slapping against the wet pavement as she moved toward the gate. The rain had slowed, but the chill still clung to her skin. She hadn't meant to make a scene, hadn't meant to stand up in front of Thomas Beckett and his team. But now, as she walked away from the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had lost something far more important than a job. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Thomas hadn't just dismissed her. He had made her feel small, insignificant, and now, the cold reality of it all settled in. She was nothing to them. She was always going to be nothing. Her heart hammered in her chest as she pushed open the gate, the sound of her breath loud in her ears. The world seemed too big for her tonight, too overwhelming. She needed to get away. She needed a moment to breathe. As she crossed the street and moved into the dimly lit alley, she heard footsteps behind her. Her heart skipped a beat. She didn't turn around. She couldn't. The tension in her body had already reached its breaking point. But the footsteps grew closer, faster, and soon, she could hear someone calling her name. Asterisk, asterisk, Maya, asterisk, asterisk. She stopped. Slowly, she turned around, her breath caught in her throat. Standing there, drenched and out of breath, was Thomas Beckett. His suit was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead. He was looking at her, not with anger or disdain, but something else, something softer. I didn't mean to chase you like this, he said, his voice tentative, unsure. I need to talk to you. Maya stood still, her body tense, her mind racing. Why was he here? What did he want now? Hadn't he already made it clear that she wasn't important? Why are you following me? She asked, her voice steady but barely. Thomas took a step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. Because I made a mistake, he said, his words slow, deliberate, and I need to fix it. She stared at him, confused. What are you talking about? The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, before Thomas spoke again, his words hitting her like a wave. You were right. Maya blinked, not sure she had heard him correctly. I was wrong about the contract. The liability clause. I missed it. I missed the trap. She felt the world shift beneath her feet. The air seemed to crackle with electricity as the truth sunk in. He had been wrong. He had made a mistake and she had caught it. Thomas Becket, the billionaire, the CEO of a massive company, had made a mistake, and it had been her. Just the maid, just the invisible worker who had saved him. The realization hit her hard, the weight of it making her chest tighten. But why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. Because you were right, he repeated. And I didn't see it. I didn't see you. I thought you were just the help. But you're not. He paused, as if the words were difficult to say, as if they were scraping against something deep inside him. You saved me. You saved my company. You saved everything. Maya felt a surge of disbelief, a feeling she couldn't quite name. She had saved him. She had saved them all. And now Thomas was standing here admitting it. The power was shifting. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but it was there. Maya had been the one who had corrected him, the one who had spoken out, and now the balance had changed. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her heart still racing, her hands trembling at her sides. You don't have to say anything, Thomas replied, his voice low, almost regretful. I wanted to say thank you. The rain started to pick up again, the droplets falling heavier now, but the world felt different. Felt like the beginning of something. Thomas Becket, the man who had made her feel small, who had made her feel invisible, was now standing before her, vulnerable. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't nothing. She was important. She had made a difference. The shift in power wasn't just in the words he spoke. It was in the way he looked at her, the way he acknowledged her in a way that had never happened before. Maya had stood up, and now, for the first time, someone saw her. And it wasn't just anyone. It was the man who had always looked through her, the man who had treated her like nothing. I never should have treated you like that, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know what to say to that. What could she say? He had been wrong, and now he was admitting it. That was enough. Maya nodded, her chest tight with a strange mix of relief and disbelief. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to come after her, to admit his mistake. But here he was, standing before her, offering something she had never thought she would get from him. Respect. You don't have to do anything, she said quietly. Just don't forget. The words slipped out before she could stop them, but they felt true. She didn't want him to forget what she had done, what she had stood up for. He didn't respond immediately, but his eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something like sincerity in them. I won't forget, he said, his voice steady, final. And in that moment, Maya realized something. This wasn't just about the contract, about the mistake he had made. It was about something deeper. It was about recognition, about being seen. And in that brief exchange, Thomas Becket had seen her. He had seen her for who she really was. The next morning, Maya stood in the quiet of the mansion's kitchen, the warm light of the sun streaming through the windows, casting soft shadows across the countertops. She had come in early, as always, to start the day before anyone else. She hadn't expected anything to change. The day had gone on like all the others, routine and steady. But when she turned around, there he was. Thomas Becket stood in the doorway, his suit impeccable, his expression uncharacteristically soft. He didn't speak at first, just watched her for a moment, his gaze lingering longer than usual. It wasn't the cold, calculating stare she had come to expect from him. This was different. Maya, he said finally, his voice quieter than usual, less authoritative. I owe you an apology. Maya didn't move, didn't look at him right away. She kept her hands busy, wiping down the counter, as if the action might steady her heart. The words hung in the air between them, still unfamiliar, still heavy. "I've treated you like you were invisible," Thomas continued, his voice low, almost reluctant. "And I was wrong. You were right all along. I didn't see you for who you really are, for what you brought to this company, to this world. I was blind." The words were simple, but they carried weight. They weren't grand gestures, no sweeping declarations, just honesty. Just the acknowledgement of a mistake. Maya still didn't look up. She felt something shift inside her, but she couldn't quite place it. She wasn't sure what she expected from him. Anger, guilt, maybe even dismissal. But this was different. She had never expected an apology from him. She didn't need it. It wasn't about that. Not anymore. Thomas stood there, waiting, as if giving her space to say something. Anything. But she didn't. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was quiet, settled, almost peaceful. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was just offering his regret. Maya felt the heaviness in her chest loosen, just a little. It wasn't the apology that mattered, not really. It was the change in him, the shift she hadn't expected. The power was no longer his alone. She could feel it now in the way he stood there, vulnerable in a way she had never seen. But still, she didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her dignity had never been tied to his acknowledgement. She had fought for it, not for recognition, but because it was hers to hold. Thomas waited, and then, quietly, he stepped forward, placing a small envelope on the counter in front of her. It was simple, unmarked, just a plain white envelope. "I've arranged something," he said, his voice careful. "A new position. It's yours if you want it." Maya glanced at the envelope, then at him. There was no need for words. She knew what it meant. It was a change, a shift, but it wasn't about the money or the title. It wasn't about the job at all. It was about respect. Maya smiled faintly, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was one of quiet understanding, of a shared moment that didn't need to be explained. She had stood her ground. She had kept her dignity. And that was enough. She nodded, just once, her eyes meeting his briefly. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady. There was no bitterness in the words. She wasn't angry. She wasn't seeking revenge. She didn't need anything from him except this, a simple moment of change. And that was enough. As Thomas turned to leave, there was no sense of finality in the air. No grand conclusion. It was just the beginning of something new. A shift, small but profound. For both of them. And as the door clicked shut behind him, Maya stood there for a moment longer, the envelope in her hands. The light from the window cast long shadows across the room, but the warmth from the sun was still there. And for the first time, it felt like everything was in its place. Maya stood by the window, the soft light of the afternoon casting long, warm streaks across the floor. The envelope rested quietly on the counter, untouched. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air thick with the scent of earth and fresh leaves. She watched as a bird flew by the window, its wings cutting through the silence, disappearing into the distance. The mansion behind her felt distant now, as if the walls had become just a little thinner. Thomas Beckett's figure had disappeared down the hall, his footsteps fading, leaving only the quiet hum of the house. She reached for the envelope, her fingers brushing the smooth paper. She opened it slowly, the sound of the seal breaking a faint whisper in the stillness. Inside, there was a simple card, a job offer, yes, but more than that, it was an acknowledgement. She didn't need to read it again. She folded it back, the paper crinkling softly between her fingers. Her eyes shifted back to the window, the rain now nothing more than a distant memory. Outside, the world was still. The city beyond was alive with movement. But here, inside, there was only calm. Maya exhaled, her shoulders relaxing as she placed the card back in the envelope. She turned away from the window, walking toward the door. The light from outside stretched behind her, warm and golden, as the door clicked softly shut, leaving the room in a deep, quiet stillness.